What would you do if you were forced to leave your best friend behind? Imagine the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the chilling consequences that followed. In the heart of the woods, a father made a decision that would change everything. He ordered his son to leave his dog behind. Not just anywhere, but deep in the forest alone. No goodbye, no second chances. The dog, loyal and trusting, had no idea why. But what happened next is beyond anything you could imagine. You see, this wasn't just a dog. This was a companion, a protector, a creature whose loyalty ran deeper than any human bond. And yet, there he was, abandoned to the wilderness. The son, forced to obey his father's cruel command, turned and walked away, hearing the painful sound of the dog's barking fade into the distance. But what the father didn't know, what the son never expected, was that the dog wasn't giving up. Not yet. Not by a long shot. As the hours passed, something incredible began to happen. Something that would shock everyone and turn this tragedy into a story of astonishing survival. What would you do if you were in the dog's paws? Would you survive against all odds? Stay with us. This is just the beginning. There are moments in life when decisions are made that can never be undone. Some choices, no matter how much time passes, haunt you forever. For 16-year-old Mark, the day he was told to leave his dog Buddy in the woods would be one of those moments. Mark had grown up with Buddy. From the moment they had met, it was clear that the dog was more than just a pet. Buddy had been with Mark through thick and thin, his loyal companion through childhood, adolescence, and every challenge life had thrown at him. When Mark felt alone, Buddy was there, always by his side with those soft, brown eyes, silently offering comfort. When Mark's parents divorced, it was Buddy who never left his side, curling up next to him on those long nights when the loneliness seemed unbearable. But now Mark's life was in turmoil. His father, a man with rigid views and little tolerance for weakness, had been growing increasingly distant. They had never gotten along. Mark, sensitive and emotional, was always the opposite of his father, stoic, strong, and uncompromising. Their differences clashed frequently, but it wasn't until that day, the day they stood at the edge of the woods, that their relationship reached a breaking point. Mark's father, Tom, had his reasons. For him, the dog was simply an inconvenience. It was a burden he didn't want to bear anymore, something he had been trying to avoid for weeks. Tom had never been fond of Buddy, always seeing him as a liability. Too much care, too much attention, and certainly too much emotion for a household that needed structure, not affection. Over time, Tom had grown tired of the messes Buddy would make, tired of the constant barking, tired of the dog's attention-seeking antics. But there was something deeper behind Tom's decision, something that Mark couldn't fully grasp at the time. Tom was at a breaking point in his life too. His job had become more demanding, his personal life falling apart, and his patience was wearing thin. The stress had clouded his judgment, and in a moment of frustration, he decided the best course of action was to remove Buddy from their lives, permanently. Mark didn't see it coming. The night before, he had come home to a quiet house. His mother was away on business, and his father had been at work late. Mark and Buddy had spent the evening watching TV together. There was nothing out of the ordinary. The dog curled up beside him as they both fell asleep on the couch. Mark never imagined that the next morning, everything would change. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Mark made his way to the table, ready for another day. But the tension in the air was palpable. Tom, sitting at the head of the table, didn't look at him. Instead, his gaze was fixed firmly on the ground, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. Mark could sense something was off, but he couldn't place it. There was an uncomfortable silence between them, something that had become all too familiar over the past few months. "Mark, I need to talk to you," Tom said, his voice cold and detached. "It's about Buddy." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Buddy? What about Buddy? The dog had never been a subject of serious discussion. He was part of the family, no questions asked. But Tom's expression was grim, his words sharp. "I'm done with the dog. I don't want him here anymore. We're taking him to the woods." Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean, take him to the woods? He's not just some object we can throw away, Dad." Tom's face hardened. "I'm not asking you, Mark. I'm telling you. It's time. He's a liability. And I don't have the time or patience for it anymore. It's either him or us." Mark stood frozen, unable to speak. The word stung, cut deep into his chest. He had never imagined his father could be so cold, so indifferent. Buddy was his best friend. They had been through everything together. How could his father just discard him like that? Tears welled up in Mark's eyes, but he swallowed them back. He had to stay strong. He had to make his father understand. "Dad, please. You can't do this. You can't just leave him out there. It's not right." But Tom's voice was unyielding. "It's already decided. We're going. Now. You don't have a choice." There was no reasoning with him. There was no arguing. Mark felt his stomach churn as his father's words sunk in. His heart shattered as he turned to look at Buddy, who was lounging lazily in the living room, unaware of the disaster about to unfold. Tom stood up and grabbed his coat. "Let's go." The drive to the woods was a quiet one. Mark couldn't bring himself to speak, and Tom didn't try to break the silence. The sound of the engine was the only thing that filled the car. The forest loomed ahead, a dark, intimidating place that seemed to reflect the storm inside Mark's chest. They parked at the edge of the trees, the vast expanse of wilderness stretching out before them. Buddy's tail wagged in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the fate awaiting him. Mark could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His chest tightened as he opened the door, watching his father get out of the car without a second glance. "Come on, Mark. Let's get this over with," Tom said. Mark hesitated, his heart racing. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't change his father's mind, but that didn't mean he had to accept it. As they walked to the edge of the woods, Buddy trotted along happily, his excitement palpable. Mark's hands trembled as he reached out to pet the dog one last time, knowing that this would be the last time he ever held Buddy in his arms. And then, with a final command from his father, Mark turned away. He watched as Buddy followed them, oblivious to the tragedy that was about to unfold. "Go on, Buddy. Go," Tom said coldly. Mark's heart shattered into a million pieces as he heard the sound of Buddy's paw steps fade into the distance. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The father and son turned and walked away, leaving Buddy behind. What happened next would be a story that neither of them could have ever predicted. The leaves crunched beneath Buddy's paws as he followed his owners, oblivious to the harshness of the situation unfolding around him. To him, this was just another walk in the woods, a chance to explore, to sniff the fresh air, and to play. For Buddy, the world was simple. There was no need for deeper understanding, no need for complex emotions. He trusted the two humans in his life, the ones who fed him, cared for him, and loved him unconditionally. But as they walked deeper into the forest, something began to change. Buddy sensed it, although he didn't fully understand what it was. He had always been able to feel when things were wrong, when Mark was sad, when his father was angry, but today felt different. There was an unease in the air that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Buddy had always been loyal. It was in his nature to follow, to stay close, to protect. He had been by Mark's side through every moment, comforting him during the darkest times. Buddy had always been there to provide companionship, to offer a sense of warmth and safety. But now, as they reached the deeper parts of the woods, a feeling of dread washed over him. Mark's hand trembled as he walked, his fingers gripping the leash tightly, knowing this moment would stay with him forever. His heart ached for Buddy, but there was nothing he could do. His father's decision was final, and Mark had no choice but to follow. But as Buddy lagged behind them, trotting contently, something in Mark shifted. A part of him couldn't bring himself to fully let go of the dog. As they walked further, Buddy grew more restless. His steps became slower, more hesitant. He had been walking with Mark and Tom for years, always attuned to their every move, to the rhythm of their steps. But now it was different. There was a disconnect, an invisible wall between them that Buddy couldn't quite grasp. The forest stretched out in front of him like a vast and unfamiliar landscape. "Buddy, come on," Tom called, his voice impatient. Buddy's tail drooped slightly as he turned his head to look at Tom, but he didn't speed up. Something told him that this wasn't just a simple walk anymore. The thick trees loomed like silent witnesses, casting long shadows across the forest floor. He could feel a sense of loss in the air, and it unsettled him. Then, Tom made a move that would change everything. He stopped in the middle of the path, his figure silhouetted against the dimming light filtering through the trees. Without a word, he unhooked the leash and gave Buddy a cold, final push toward the dense underbrush. "Go on, get out of here," Tom said, his voice hard and emotionless. Buddy froze in his tracks. He looked at Mark, who stood off to the side, his eyes filled with an emotion Buddy had never seen before: guilt, sorrow, helplessness. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The air was thick with tension, and Buddy's heart raced. He didn't know what to do. He had never been in this situation before, where the people he trusted, the people he loved, had turned their backs on him. Buddy slowly took a few hesitant steps back. He turned his gaze to the dense trees around him, feeling the cool wind rustle the leaves. The woods were big, overwhelming even, but Buddy was a dog of unwavering loyalty. He had always stayed by Mark's side through every trial, through every tear. And this was no different. Buddy's eyes lingered on Mark for a moment longer. His owner, the one he had protected, loved, and stood by for so many years, stood motionless. The sadness in Mark's eyes was palpable. But Buddy had always understood more than people gave him credit for. He knew that if he left now, if he turned his back on his human, it would break both of them. It would be an unspoken betrayal, something that could never be undone. With one final glance at Mark, Buddy made a decision. Without hesitation, Buddy turned and trotted back down the path, his paws moving faster now, his eyes focused on one thing: finding Mark. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew that leaving wasn't an option. His loyalty wasn't just about following directions. It was about standing by those who needed him, no matter the cost. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he heard the familiar sound of paws approaching from behind. He turned, half expecting to see Buddy trailing behind as he had done countless times before. But as the dog's shape appeared through the trees, Mark felt a mix of surprise and relief flood his chest. Buddy's ears were perked up, his tail wagging with excitement. He hadn't given up on Mark, not even for a second. The bond between them was unbreakable, stronger than any force that might try to tear them apart. Tom stood still, his face a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "What the hell is he doing?" he muttered under his breath. He had thought Buddy would simply wander off, become lost in the woods, and never come back. It was supposed to be the end of the story, a clean break. But Buddy wasn't giving up that easily. Buddy ignored Tom completely. His focus remained entirely on Mark, who, for the first time in what felt like hours, allowed himself a small smile. The dog's loyalty had surprised everyone, especially Tom, who had underestimated the bond between Mark and Buddy. Buddy reached Mark's side, and for a brief moment, they simply stood there together, a silent understanding passing between them. Mark bent down to pet Buddy, his hands shaking with emotion as he scratched behind the dog's ears. He knew, deep down, that there was no way he could leave Buddy behind again. No matter what his father said, no matter how much pressure was placed on him, Buddy was family. Tom's eyes narrowed, and his jaw clenched. But there was nothing he could do. The dog had made his choice. And, in that moment, Mark knew that he too had to make his own. Buddy's unexpected loyalty wasn't just a response to a harsh decision. It was a reminder of the true meaning of devotion. the kind that doesn't depend on the circumstances, the kind that endures even in the most painful situations. It was loyalty that couldn't be broken, even in the face of abandonment, even in the depth of the woods. Buddy wasn't going anywhere, and neither was Mark. The woods might have been vast and daunting, but their bond was stronger than any fear or distance. Just when it seemed like Buddy had made his decision to stay, something entirely unexpected happened. The air was thick with tension. The rustling of leaves felt deafening in the otherwise silent woods. Mark knelt beside Buddy, his hands gently resting on the dog's back. His eyes were full of gratitude and disbelief. How could this dog, who had been rejected so callously, still offer such unshakable loyalty? But as Mark began to rise, preparing to walk back with Buddy at his side, something caught his attention. Buddy's ears perked up. His head turned, sharply, toward the deeper part of the woods, where the trees thickened and the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly. His body stiffened. Mark froze, following the dog's gaze. For a moment, nothing moved. The forest felt eerily still, as if holding its breath. Then, without warning, Buddy darted off, faster than Mark had ever seen him run. His paws hit the ground with a rhythmic thud as he tore down the narrow, winding path. "Buddy!" Mark shouted, his voice cracking with confusion and panic. "No! Come back!" But Buddy didn't stop. He disappeared into the thick woods, his movements swift and determined. Mark hesitated for a split second before chasing after him. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had no idea what was happening, but one thing was certain. Buddy wasn't just running aimlessly. There was purpose behind every stride. Mark pushed through the underbrush, his legs burning as he tried to keep up. The trees seemed to close in around him, casting long, jagged shadows. He could still hear Buddy's footsteps, distant but steady, growing fainter with every second. What could have driven him to run like that? Then, in a moment that took Mark completely by surprise, the sound of Buddy's barks pierced the silence. Loud, desperate. There was urgency in those barks, a sharpness that made Mark's blood run cold. He pushed forward, his legs moving faster now as he followed the sounds. The trail led him to a small clearing, a forgotten patch of forest, hidden deep within the trees. There, Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. Standing just at the edge of the clearing was Buddy. But the dog wasn't alone. There was another figure there, a man no more than a few feet away from him. Mark's heart stopped. The man, his face weathered and rough, stood frozen, staring down at Buddy. The dog's posture was completely different now. No longer the submissive animal that had followed Mark and his father through the woods, but one with purpose, pride, and strength. Buddy didn't hesitate. With a quick, calculated movement, he lunged forward and barked furiously at the man. He stepped closer, growling in a way Mark had never heard before. It was as though Buddy knew something Mark didn't, something that had been hidden for years. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The man turned to face him now, his expression unreadable. Mark's mind raced. Why had Buddy led him here? What was this strange encounter all about? And just as quickly as Buddy had sprinted away, he returned to Mark's side. But this time there was no sign of fear. Only loyalty, and perhaps a sense of justice. Buddy had led Mark to this moment, not out of instinct or randomness, but because he knew that there was more at play here than anyone had realized. Mark stood in shock, unsure of what to do. The twist was inescapable. His dog hadn't just been running. He had led him to a confrontation that neither of them were prepared for, a confrontation that would change everything. And as Buddy stood there, watching the man with unwavering eyes, Mark finally understood. Buddy wasn't just protecting him. He was showing him something he couldn't ignore. Something hidden in the shadows of the woods. Something that Mark was only beginning to uncover. The air was thick with tension as Buddy stood by Mark's side, the two of them now facing the mysterious man in the clearing. Mark's heart hammered in his chest, a mix of confusion and fear clouding his mind. The man before him seemed strangely familiar, yet Mark couldn't place him. The dog's growls had subsided, but there was an undeniable sense of urgency in the air. Mark's eyes flicked to Buddy, who stood tall and alert, his stance protective and unwavering. It was clear that the dog wasn't simply reacting out of instinct. No, this wasn't just another stray encounter in the woods. There was something far deeper at play. The man, after a long pause, broke the silence. His voice was low, rough, and unexpectedly filled with emotion. "I knew you'd come." Mark's confusion deepened. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The man looked at Buddy, then back at Mark, his eyes heavy with a mix of regret and resignation. "You don't remember me, do you?" Mark's stomach twisted, a growing sense of dread creeping over him. As the man took a step forward, the weight of the moment seemed to settle over Mark like a heavy blanket. He had the strange sensation that he was standing on the precipice of something huge, something life-changing. "I'm the one who trained Buddy," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the one who gave him to your father." The words hit Mark like a thunderclap. The world seemed to stop spinning for a brief moment. "What? No. That's impossible. My father never mentioned you." The man let out a bitter laugh, his eyes full of sorrow. "Of course he didn't. He didn't want you to know the truth. He didn't want you to know that Buddy was meant for you. He didn't want you to know that your real father, was the one who brought Buddy into your life." Mark's mind reeled, his thoughts scattered in every direction as the man's words cut through the confusion. Real father? Buddy was meant for him? The revelation was a tidal wave, overwhelming in its intensity. Mark turned to look at Buddy, his loyal dog, who had been by his side for years, offering unconditional love and support. But now, in the light of this new information, everything seemed to shift. Why had Buddy been so loyal? Why had he refused to leave Mark, even when the boy's father had forced him to? There was a connection here, a bond stronger than Mark had ever understood. The man took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Buddy was trained to protect you. He was always meant to watch over you. When I couldn't be there, I trusted him to be the father figure you needed, the one your real father could never be." Mark's world seemed to crumble around him. The implications of the man's words were staggering. His entire life, his relationship with Buddy, the way he had been raised, now seemed like a carefully constructed lie. A twist of fate had led him here, standing in front of this stranger, learning that everything he thought he knew about his family and his dog was wrong. As the realization sank in, Mark's mind screamed for answers. But why? Why did he never tell me? Why was I kept in the dark? The man's eyes softened with sorrow. "He thought you'd be safer that way. He thought if you knew the truth, it would only bring pain. But, Buddy knew. He always knew. That's why he protected you. He's been watching over you all these years, even when you didn't understand." Mark stood frozen, his thoughts a whirlwind of questions, emotions, and disbelief. The shocking revelation hung in the air like an unspoken truth. The bond he had with Buddy was more than just that of a pet and his owner. It was a deeper connection, a thread that tied them together in a way Mark couldn't yet fully comprehend. And as he stood there, staring at the man who claimed to be his real father, Mark finally understood the true depth of Buddy's loyalty. It wasn't just the bond of a dog to his owner. It was a connection that transcended the years of separation, a loyalty born from something far greater than either of them had ever realized. The woods were silent now, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Mark stood in front of the man who had just revealed a truth that threatened to dismantle everything he had known. Buddy, the dog who had always been there, his protector, his friend, now seemed to take on an entirely new meaning. The bond between them was deeper than Mark had ever imagined. For a long moment, Mark stood there, his thoughts still a storm of confusion and emotion. He wanted to yell, to demand answers, to understand how this man, his real father, could have been kept a secret for so long. But as he glanced down at Buddy, who stood faithfully at his side, the anger and disbelief began to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding. Buddy had known. The dog had always known that Mark needed him, that he was meant to be by his side through it all. And in that moment, Mark felt the weight of that loyalty, that unbreakable bond. It was more than just companionship. It was a promise that no matter what had happened, no matter how far they had been separated, Buddy would always be there for him. The man, his real father, watched him closely, his eyes full of regret. "I never wanted to hurt you, Mark. I only wanted to keep you safe." Mark swallowed hard, his throat tight. His emotions were raw, but something in the man's voice told him that the time for anger was over. It wasn't about the lies anymore. It was about the truth they had both been avoiding for years. "Why did you leave us?" Mark's voice trembled, but he stood tall, the weight of his emotions grounding him. "Why didn't you come back?" The man looked down, his eyes filled with shame. "I thought you'd be better off without me. I thought if I stayed away, you'd grow up with the life I couldn't give you. But I was wrong. I should have fought harder for you. I should have come back." Mark felt the sting of those words, but in some strange way, it was a relief. The answers he had been searching for were finally coming to light. His real father wasn't the enemy. He was just a man who had made the wrong choice, driven by fear and guilt. But now, standing here in the woods with Buddy, Mark felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was missing. It wasn't just about finding out who his real father was. It was about understanding that Buddy had never left him. The dog had been there all along, even when Mark didn't know it, and that unwavering loyalty was more powerful than any family secret. "Buddy," Mark whispered, crouching down to the dog's level. The German shepherd's ears perked up, and his eyes locked onto Mark's with a look that seemed to say, "I've got you." Mark's heart swelled as he reached out to run his hand through Buddy's fur, the same fur that had been a constant comfort during the toughest moments of his life. The dog nuzzled him gently, as if to remind him that this was enough. This love, this connection, this was the true family Mark needed. He didn't need to search for the answers in the past or in the unknown. The answers had always been right there in front of him, in the eyes of his loyal dog. The man, Mark's real father, watched this exchange, his face softening. "I see it now. Buddy was the one who kept you safe. He was the one who never gave up on you." Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, he's been the one constant in my life, and I don't think I could ever repay him for that." The man stepped forward, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. "You don't have to. You've got each other now. That's all that matters." And as Mark stood up, his hand resting on Buddy's head, he realized the truth in those words. He didn't need to search for what had been lost, or try to fix the broken parts of his past. He had everything he needed right here, his dog, his family, and the love that had always been there, even when he couldn't see it. With a final glance at his real father, Mark made a decision. He would move forward. He would let the past be just that, the past. And with Buddy by his side, he knew there was nothing he couldn't face. Together, they would write their own story. A story not defined by secrets or pain, but by loyalty, love, and the unspoken bond between a boy and his dog. "Let's go home, Buddy," Mark said softly, the dog's tail wagging in response. The two of them walked off into the woods, the sounds of their footsteps a quiet echo in the air. And with each step, Mark felt a little lighter, a little more at peace. Because in the end, home wasn't a place, it was wherever Buddy was. As Mark and Buddy disappeared into the woods, the weight of their journey lingered in the air. The past had been unveiled, secrets had been revealed. And yet, in the end, it was the simple bond between a boy and his dog that stood as the most powerful force. But it raises a question that may be on your mind. What is the true meaning of loyalty? Is it defined by the bloodlines that connect us? Or is it something deeper, something that transcends family ties, built on trust, love, and unwavering support? Buddy, the dog who never left, was a testament to that kind of loyalty. one that wasn't bound by anything other than devotion. Now, think about your own life. Do you have someone or something that's been by your side through thick and thin? Someone whose loyalty never wavered, even when the world around you changed. In moments of hardship, we often overlook the quiet, steadfast love that's right in front of us. But stories like Mark's remind us that sometimes, it's not about finding the answers in the past. It's about recognizing the loyalty and love that surrounds us in the present. So, here's the challenge. Who in your life has shown you that kind of unwavering loyalty? What can you do to honor that bond? To show your appreciation for the ones who've stood by you when the world seemed uncertain? Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. Let's talk about the unsung heroes in our lives, the ones who may not wear capes, but who show us what true loyalty really means. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who could use a reminder that sometimes love is all you need to keep moving forward.